Hi, I'm Eric Ford for Made Here. Director Dwayne Peterson from Colchester, Vermont, and Jordan Rowell teamed up to create the compelling film No Other Lake. Motivated by a desire to better understand his home watershed, Jordan embarks on a kayaking trip along the 120-mile length of Lake Champlain, stopping along the way to talk to a range of different people about the future of their basin. You can watch No Other Lake and other great Made Here films streaming on vermontpublic.org and through the PBS app. Enjoy the film, and thanks for watching.
The August average temperature in this piece of water is 5 degrees warmer than in 1970, 5 degrees Celsius. This is the oldest form of life on Earth. Cyanobacteria is everywhere in the world, but in different quantities, but under some conditions of high nutrients, with calm water, the heat, the sun, they love it.
It felt like 100 degrees out there, and you're paddling through like green and blue sludge. It's like the worst conditions of the whole trip for sure. People have lived in the Lake Champlain Basin for thousands of years, with the ancestors of today's Abenaki, Iroquois, and Mohican people being the original stewards of this place. But beginning about 400 years ago, white colonizers arrived and brought with them an ethos of dominion and control, which ultimately led to widespread deforestation, habitat loss, and the pollution of our lakes and rivers. In 1972, Congress passed the Clean Water Act in one of several attempts to stop the devastation of our nation's waterways. And while we've made great progress in the last 50 years, we have a long way to go in addressing the issues of today, like nutrient pollution and invasive species, on top of the increasing impacts of climate change. This all leads me to ask, where do we go from here? What does the future look like in this place? And what's my role in all of this?
I spent 18 years of my life living less than 5 miles from Lake Champlain, and I feel like I barely got to know it. There's all these different vantage points. Everyone has a different perspective, so in order for me to really immerse myself or try to and learn from them, I need to hear the different perspectives, not just by talking to different people, but by actually going to the different places on the lake. My name is Jordan Rowell, and tomorrow I'm going to start my trip of paddling the length of Lake Champlain. I'm gonna put my kayak in Whitehall, New York, paddle 10 to 15 miles a day, and set up a camp at a new place each night as I make my way north. I'm gonna talk to different people I meet along the way about the biggest challenges of Lake Champlain to try to figure out what's going on, how we can do better, and what the future might look like in this place.
When I decided to paddle the length of the lake, the big question is, where do you start? You know, one way to look at it is to think about where water starts its journey. And I wanted to talk to somebody that could give me a big picture view of Lake Champlain and where else to do that but at the top of Mount Mansfield.
I've kayaked across it, but I've never kayaked up and down it. It's a long ways.
Right, and that, I mean, honestly, Bill, I think I paddled on Lake Champlain once before. My paddling resume is, well, let's just say Lake Champlain is gonna beef it up quite a bit.
For most of it, you got beautiful shore to hug, and extraordinarily beautiful lake that it is also is the kind of collection of everything that happens on either side.
I guess a part of the reason I want to do this trip is because I think that big ideas get lost in translation sometimes.
We don't get many opportunities anymore in this world to have long, deep, real conversations with people because, you know, there's always something going on and you're pressed for time. And one of the best things about walking or paddling long distances is there's no hurry. You're not getting there anytime soon. In a deeper sense, a journey like this one is a trip through space, obviously. You're covering physical ground, but it's also deeply a trip through time. When you talk with people, you're going into the past and figuring out where things came from and how they got where they are, and you're going into the future, and that's what our imaginations are, a sense of what things might become and where they might go.
So I was definitely ready to start paddling. I've been talking about it long enough. It was time to get in the boat and go north.
You got it?
Yeah, ready? I was pretty nervous. I was excited, but I was also honestly pretty scared. So when we showed up at the put-in, I was surprised to see a crowd of people that had come together to help see me off.
My name is John Rowell, here on another adventure with my son Jordan. As a dad, it always concerns you. You know, your kid's going away on the lake for, 2 weeks? But Jordy has always been the kid to take on huge adventures and pulls them off well. So knowing that, I'm not that worried about it.
It was very nice to have all my friends and family join me for the first day, but there was a sense of relief, to be honest, when they all turned around to head back to the put-in and I continued north. And finally get to breathe and be like, wow, this is it. I'm on the trip. That first morning on the lake was really foggy and eerie, and I wasn't planning on talking to anybody that day. I was just planning on starting there in Benson Landing and paddling up towards Fort Ticonderoga and just kind of taking in the sights as I went. But I realized that on the other side of the lake, a van had pulled up with a Vermont Youth Conservation Corps trailer on the back. I ended up
running into these folks that were about to go out on their kayaks and pull invasive species. And so I asked them if I could join them.
We are pulling out the Eurasian water chestnut, and they're invasive to Vermont. They'll take up space on top because they kind of spread out. So they'll block out a lot of the sunlight for any plants that are growing down below that need sunlight, as well as other animal species. So one plant can have up to 12 seeds, and then those 12 seeds can root and be in the sediment for 10 to 14 years. And then those can grow 12 more seeds, so that's like 144 plants. So if you take one plant out, then you could be helping a ton. So.
It's this big paradigm shift to recognize that humans can do good in this landscape. We have a role to play to help heal some of the wounds that we've dealt the lake in the past. And Helen and Demery are great examples of what that looks like.
This morning at Benson Landing was super foggy, and eventually it burned off, and it ended up being a scorcher. It was like 90 degrees, or at least it felt like it. But today I just met a couple more people who felt ownership over this place, and was inspired to find more people who had that sense of ownership. And so I'm gonna keep trying to find that in the days ahead.
The Crown Point Bridge is like this gateway into the main part of the lake. Because as soon as you cross underneath that bridge, the lake changes character, and you're in it now. We got a little bit of chop this morning. Just the littlest bit, which is new. The lake is starting to pick up some length at this point, so any wind coming from the south now has 30 miles or so to build up and be a little bit more noticeable. I'm making my first decent sized crossing of the lake. It's beautiful out here. Definitely the biggest expanse of water I found myself in on this trip. The water's almost 300 feet deep below me. So, hope I don't drop anything. I was really excited to go to Split Rock. The cliffs there are 200 feet high above the water, and the lake plunges 400 feet deep right below them. I was tracing my journey on the map, and it was kind of cool to look back on it and say that, yeah, I'd done this part already. I've come this far. 1/3 down, 2/3 to go. Invasive species work is all about correcting mistakes of the past. But what about the future?
I'm John Davis, rewilding advocate for the Adirondack Council and executive director of the Rewilding Institute. And we are here in the heart of Split Rock Wildway, which is my backyard wildlife corridor, a place I've spent a lot of time trying to help protect.
I'm Carly Summers. I'm with Cornell Cooperative Extension in Essex County, and I'm the agriculture lead, and I think it's a really important place to be looking at as a potential model for other areas, because there's a lot of small diverse farms that actually are pretty synergistic with the wilderness.
Carly's been a real inspiration in helping find ways to make farming wildlife friendly. The Wildway, Split Rock Wildway, is a vital connection between Lake Champlain and the high peaks to the west, and it's one of the botanically wealthiest parts of Adirondack Park and of the northeastern United States. So we're in a very special place, and it's really my backyard, and I love it here.
What does protecting wildlife corridors mean for, human needs?
I hope ultimately we value wildlife and wild places for their own sakes, and that we don't need to justify saving Split Rock Wild Forest or any other place in human terms. There are definite human values, human benefits. Big wild forests sequester enormous amounts of carbon and help cool the waters so that aquatic species can continue to thrive. So even if we don't fish or swim, we should be very concerned about what we do on land, because in some way or another, we're all using that water. We're all depending on that water.
If the communities around Lake Champlain and all the tributaries leading into it could have farms that are smaller, more diversified, supported by community members, I think we would have a healthier watershed.
The Split Rock Wildway is an example of how human efforts to conserve land and protect it can be successful. There came this realization that the fundamental relationship that humans have with our natural resources is sort of the building block on which everything else is built. And so we need to have a fundamental shift in how our culture sees places like Lake Champlain and the value of clean, healthy water.
A lot of us, I think, reach some moment of a dawning realization that the grown-ups haven't really figured it all out. They mean well, they're blowing it. This feeling of like, wow, yeah, they've raised me okay, and I'm thankful for it all, but I don't want to accept the world as it is. This feels wrong and like it could be better. Reaching that critical, vulnerable moment of being kind of appalled and dismayed by what's coming of things, this feeling of it all coming undone. And then right there's this feels like this critical juncture of a young person either becomes a burned out, quick cynic, or somehow someone gets to them and be like, no, like, cool, you get it now, the light's on, now what are we gonna do with that? Like, we need you. There's a lot of folks who need these young people who care and are activated. So like, come on, join.
What do we need to do to really heal our relationship with this land and with this watershed and this basin and this lake?
I think one part of rebuilding our relationship, it's starting with the self. Can you spend more time observing and witnessing and feeling like a participant of this place? Like, you start with where you are. And if you're here right now, there's no place else. Let all of the other places go for a little bit and just start here.
Abenaki, we are place-based people, and we are of a place. Like Nulhegan Band of the Coosac, Abenaki Nation, that's what the English version is. But people would know us as people of the wooden traps who live in the pines who see the first light of day. We are part of that land, and the land's part of us. So water is very important to us. The water inside you has been through ancestors of ours, has been through animals, and has been through trees, and now it's in your body. And it leaves an imprint of who that entity or that life form is on the thing that it touches. So that water is the glue that holds all of us together. And when you make the water sick, then you make other things sick. It disrupts the whole cycle of life. We don't own the lake. We were stewards of the lake, and we use the lake for our resources and manage those resources to survive. So for us, it is about stewardship and not so much ownership. But the way the European culture has set up the structure is that it's a one-dimensional view of I own this, so I own everything on it and all the resources. And when I use up my resources, I'm going to try to get your resources.
So we can't go backwards, but for tomorrow and the day after and moving forward, how can we take that idea of being stewards and not owners and apply it to solving these real challenges? I mean, what does that look like?
Well, you have to have an intimate relationship with the thing you're trying to preserve. If you're invested in what you do or connected to the source, then you may care more. And then if you care more, you're going to protect it because you have stock in it.
I feel like there's a couple of steps in terms of really doing the work to protect a place. And step one is you got to go out there, because if you don't go on the lake, you don't know what you have. And once you know what you have, I mean...
And hopefully you want to preserve it.
Because we got something pretty good here, I think.
I think so. I think so. It's served our people for thousands of years. I'd hate to see us mess it up in 400. Right?
Yeah. After paddling for a week to get to Burlington, even though I was in a familiar region, I had a completely different sense of place. And it was a big milestone because I knew that getting to Burlington was kind of like the halfway point, but I also knew that the lake north of Burlington was really kind of the hard part. If the first half of the trip was too sunny and too hot, the second half of the trip was the opposite. When it started to rain, it didn't stop for like 3 days. And also the winds were really challenging to navigate. And I had like waves crashing over the bow of my boat. Whoa. Yeah, it was tough.
On one hand, I'm very happy with, on both hands, I'm very happy with how the trip's gone so far. This has been a great experience. But I also didn't really anticipate how hard this would be. This is the kind of rain that's gonna stir up all the phosphorus on the bottom of the lake and wash more in. I think we're gonna see some blooms this weekend. We're going to, ground zero, Missisquoi Bay, one of the most heavily affected areas of the lake by cyanobacteria. We'll see.
In order to get more people on board with protecting Lake Champlain, we just need to get more people out on the lake.
I'm Andrew Romano. I am a student at the University of Vermont studying Parks, Recreation, and Tourism. Grateful to be here, to be the spokesperson of one of my clubs, People of Color Outdoors, also known as POCO, which is a social justice outing club for BIPOC individuals on campus. And I'm just super stoked that we have the opportunity to talk to Jordan on his fantastic adventure here on Champlain.
Tell me again what POCO is and then why it has to exist.
We mostly seek to break down the barriers for access to the outdoors for underrepresented groups. What we want POCO to do is to really instill a sense of personal identity and personal inclusion inside that greater community. One of my close friends, he's black, and I took him skiing while we were on the chairlift, and he was like, I'm doing white people things. And to me, I've never thought about that. It's just skiing is another sport that you could be outside, but to some, it's like a racial barrier to like be like if you're doing outdoor things like you're white, and people might not want to lose that sense of identity. When youth aren't exposed to the outdoors, they can't foster that appreciation for the outdoors. And then when they come here, they're like, oh, mountains, so what? Champlain, so what? And then they also don't understand that taking care of them is quite the important thing to do.
So the importance have always been dairy farmers. We've sold the cows in 2018, so we're not doing any more dairying. And we built the sugar house and started that in 1999. And now we're transitioning, it looks like, into apple orchards.
Maple and apples, that sounds good.
There's lots of really good recipes too with that stuff. Well, this isn't really a dairy barn anymore. We've been taking the pipeline down and the stanchions. This end probably is eventually going to be some sort of a cidery, but it's all going to need to be reworked. But we have a building, so I think we can repurpose it somehow. When there was a lot of news reporting about, that the farmers were the ones who were dirtying the lake, the kids would come home and say, why do people hate us? Why do people not like us? And I think it's very easy when you talk about farms or when you talk about a group of people and you're talking about them in general terms, it's easy to demonize people. But I think when people meet us and they realize, we're a mom, a dad, we're sisters, we're brothers, and we care about the farm and we care about the environment as much as anybody else. In 5 generations from now, if the lake is still nasty and we haven't cleaned it up, they're not going to say John Doe and Laura Lou dirtied the lake back in 2021. They're going to say the people that lived here, and it's going to be all of us.
Day 13. We are on the edge of the Missisquoi National Wildlife Refuge in Swanton, Vermont. We're about a mile away from the mouth of the Missisquoi River. I can see Canada. So Missisquoi Bay was always the place that if we thought we were going to see a cyanobacteria bloom, that it was probably going to be there. You have really shallow water. You have a bay that's sort of closed off from the rest of the lake, so there's not a lot of mixing. You also have the Missisquoi River draining into the bay, which is picking up a lot of phosphorus from the agriculture activity that's happening up the watershed. And so as soon as I started to get close to Missisquoi Bay, I was really paying attention to the water and what it looked like. At first, it was just like the water was kind of speckled green, and there's a lot of things that could look like cyanobacteria bloom, and so I wasn't sure at first. But as the day wore on, little spots of green here and there turned into a film that covered the entire surface of the water.
I mean, all the water around me is just pea soup green. There's this green film on top of it. It's gross. This is the first time on this trip that you couldn't pay me enough to jump in this water right now. I don't even feel good paddling through it. It just does not look good. This is the type of stuff that makes people not be proud of Lake Champlain.
I mean, it was way worse than I could have imagined. over the course of my time on the lake, I'd started to really feel an attachment to this place and a sense of pride over it. And the last day of the trip, that all kind of fell apart. It made me want to talk with someone who lived there and kind of get their perspective on what it's like when your precious lake is turned to sludge.
If you want to pull it up, I'll put the tire there.
Okay, great.
This is my grandfather's house right there. I've been here since I've been very, very, very little, and I've seen the situation evolve over the years and degrade. Until yesterday morning, it was just great. We were still swimming in the lake, but starting noon yesterday with wind changes, and it became just like you see there, and it's been part of our life at the end of the summer for the last 20 years, I would say. 80% of the nutrient load coming to the bay is in 20 days during the year.
Wow.
The big weather events creates a lot of erosion in our waterways, and the buffer zones are not strong enough to hold the water because there's too much water, and it washes the dirt, and with it brings the nutrients.
What would you tell someone who's like, what can I do to help?
Well, this here is local. This here is where I can have an impact, and other people will have an impact somewhere else. And if we all join in, we'll reverse the situation, because we can't go on like this. People think, oh, I'll go somewhere else, some other lake, but long term there won't be anywhere else to go if we don't learn how to fix the one that's next to us. There won't be any other lake.
It really was a powerful experience that, like, on one hand, really kind of soured the end of the trip, but it also reminded me of why I was out there in the first place, because things weren't okay. Finding a way to take action and do something positive was important to me after my trip, and see what it would look like to build a better future for this watershed. Sharing what I'd learned on my trip with students at UVM was a chance for me to kind of come full circle. Welcome to Potash Brook here in Eastwoods. It's a 40-acre parcel that UVM owns, and we get to be a part of collecting data to contribute to the study of this place. There's a physical assessment, a biological assessment, and a chemical assessment. And everyone's going to get to cycle through each station and contribute to this awesome citizen science project that the Watershed Alliance is doing.
I'm sorry, what's your name? Annie. And then Annie and I are going to try and kick all this good stuff in.
Hi, I'm Annie Beasy. I'm an environmental science major. We've been learning a lot about watersheds in class recently. Being in the water itself, I think it's definitely really helpful just to kind of put two and two together with what you're learning about in class and how it applies to the real world, especially so close by to where you're living and going about your day-to-day.
Learning about the watershed in a place like Potash Brook is important, but learning is only just the first step.
Here are 4 basswoods that, as a group, are going to want to end up on the upper slope, please. That upper terrace shall be a little forest we're putting in. So often, we only think of humans coming into a landscape and taking something away. This is one of these activities that totally flips that. We are here not to take something out, but to put something back in. In a world kind of often feel like tumbling down around us, we're getting to work. We're rolling up our sleeves and doing stuff.
This used to be a farm,
Yeah, I'm a senior now, so my freshman year, this was all corn. And it was conventionally managed, roundup every year, tilling every year. And now we've seen birders come down here, we've seen students do research down here. So it's just been like this amazing change over the last 4 years of more structure, more complexity, more biodiversity. And the little things that we can do, like planting these trees today, will help just accelerate that.
Wow.
There you go. So should I break that up a little bit?
Yeah, I break it up a little bit. Sweet, that looks awesome. Yeah. Sometimes there's this disconnect between like what needs to be done and like what an individual can do. Even just taking Lake Champlain as an example, how do we keep these thousands of tons of phosphorus from entering the lake? But this is pretty darn empowering to do this kind of stuff. And as much as like I do kind of like feel despair sometimes, it's balanced out by things like this. You know what I mean?
I like that.
You know, when this place floods in the spring like crazy, this wetland will hold a pretty significant amount of water. Slow it down, sink it, spread it out. The sediment here can settle, so it's not going into the lake. These trees will filter the water and just, all in all, like have a better ecology, you know. Classes come down here too sometimes, and they can, you know, do more plantings here or do whatever else a wetland needs. And even ask the question, like, what does this place need, is something that we don't ask very much. So that's a hard question, but I think it's an important one for students to think about, not only in the environmental studies and science departments, but everyone who goes here, everyone who lives in a watershed, which is everyone, you know what I mean?
I'm not so naive to think that any of these problems have simple solutions, or even that by paddling the length of the lake, I'm somehow cleaning it up. But I do think that we have to listen to each other, we have to learn from each other, and we also just have to get out there. Because if we let these places slip away, if we let Lake Champlain continue on the path that it is, then there's not going to be anywhere for us to go. Because at the end of the day, there is no other lake.
Vermont Public, partnering with local filmmakers to bring you stories made here. For more, visit vermontpublic.org.